Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the channel. UFC 291, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje is right around the corner. It goes down on July 29th in Salt Lake City, Utah. And this is going to be my top 3 reasons I hate UFC 291. I'm also going to be doing a top 3 reasons I love UFC 291, as well as a bunch of prediction videos. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss those. But we are going to go from 3 to 1, 1 being the reason I most hate UFC 291. And I was actually shocked when I kind of looked over this card because there's a lot to hate about UFC 291, even though it is a great card. So I actually have 2 honorable mentions as well. Now, before I get into any of my reasons, comment down below, what are some reasons that you hate UFC 291? So starting off with my first honorable mention, and that is that it is in Salt Lake City, Utah. You know how many fights are going to now have an asterisk next to it? People are going to be saying, oh, well, it was because the elevation. That's why I lost the fight. We saw it with Leon Edwards, Kamaru Usman 2, back when Leon Edwards got a 5th round KO. Everyone was saying, oh, Leon Edwards, it's because it was at elevation. That's why he got dominated in the 2nd and 3rd round. And it really just didn't add up. It didn't make sense. Then you had Luke Rockhold and Paulo Costa gassing out in the co-main. And you just had a lot of fighters where their gas tanks look suspect in Salt Lake City, Utah because of the elevation. And I just hate it because you're fighting there, you know it's an elevation change, you accepted the fight, and now every fighter that loses is going to have an excuse, a built-in excuse that, oh my God, I was fighting at elevation, I didn't realize it, my cardio was horrible. Or if Justin Gaethje beats Dustin Poirier, they're going to say, oh, well, Justin Gaethje trains at elevation, so that's the only reason he won. And I just hate that they have that built-in excuse. If they lose, they're going to blame it on the elevation. And also, you have Derek Lewis fighting on this card. Derek Lewis is literally going to gas out on the walk to the cage. Who thought it was a good idea, whether it be the UFC, Derek Lewis, or Derek Lewis's manager? Why would he accept a fight to fight in Salt Lake City, Utah? He gasses out in almost every fight anyway, or half the time he doesn't even throw that many shots. So this is just a horrible overall thing for the card, especially when you're going to throw a heavyweight fight on the card. So I hate that it's in Salt Lake City, Utah. Moving on to my next honorable mention and my last honorable mention, and that is, and I really hate to say this, but we have to see the dead body of Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson is on a 5-fight losing streak, and he looked horrible against Nate Diaz at UFC 279. Now, I will defend him a bit. I've been a Tony Ferguson defender for a while, but he took that fight against Li Jingliang on 3 weeks' notice. The UFC had a crappy UFC 279 card, and so they tried to throw some fights together last minute. They did Kevin Holland, Daniel Rodriguez, and Tony Ferguson, Li Jingliang. And that's why that Tony Ferguson looked so bad in this fight, because then on 24 hours' notice, it got switched around to Nate Diaz, which I thought it was a better opponent for Tony Ferguson. I think Li Jingliang would have absolutely dirted him. But we know Tony Ferguson's on the decline, and he looked horrible in that Nate Diaz fight. And I really do believe people were writing off Tony Ferguson too early. But then when he got front kick KO'd by Michael Chandler, I really think that was the end of the Tony Ferguson that we knew. And now just to look at his career, at one point, Tony was on this long winning streak, and now he's on a 5-fight losing streak. I think he's trying to go on to match his winning streak with the same amount of a losing streak. You know, he lost to Michael Chandler by KO. Got dominated by Neil Dariush, got dominated by Charles Oliveira, got dominated by Justin Gaethje, and lost to Nate Diaz in a fight that was competitive, but both guys looked like garbage. And now he's taking on Bobby Green, and I think Tony Ferguson can beat Bobby Green, but even if he beats him, I don't think he's going to look good. As Tony Ferguson, as being one of Tony Ferguson's biggest fans at one point in time, and just loving watching Tony Ferguson's style because his pace and his output was his biggest weapon. And now seeing what he is now on a 5-fight losing streak, and it's just his skill set isn't where it once was. It's really hard to watch. It's like watching, somebody it's just watching someone's decline just honestly hurts as an MMA fan. It happened with Robbie Lawler. Not this bad, but if Tony Ferguson ends up getting finished by Bobby Green, I think that's the end of Tony Ferguson. He needs to be cut from the organization. He needs to retire. And I don't know if Tony Ferguson's the type of guy to just stick around forever and go fight in another organization. He's 39 years old at lightweight. And I'm really sad, and I absolutely hate that we may have to see the dead body of Tony Ferguson at UFC 291. I hope he gets a win and then rides off into the sunset. I would absolutely love he beats Bobby Green and then rides off into the sunset, retires in the cage like Robbie Lawler did. but I doubt that's going to happen. Moving on to my actual list, starting off with number 3. And this is kind of a weird reason because it may or may not be true. We don't truly know yet. But that is that Paulo Costa versus Ikram Aliskerov may not happen. Now, the second that this fight was announced for UFC 291, I said, look, I don't think this fight's happening. I think the UFC is announcing this to put pressure on Paulo Costa to try to get him to take a fight against an unranked contender. And I just had a feeling that it wasn't going to happen. My feelings have kind of changed a little bit because we've heard a lot of rumors recently, none confirmed by legitimate sources, that, oh, Paulo Costa's out of his fight with Ikram. And I may make a video on this, but I'm kind of waiting for more details. I have a feeling, my theory behind this is, and I've just started to develop this theory over the last 4 or 5 hours, I think the UFC thought they would get a deal in place for Paulo Costa to fight Ikram on UFC 291. And they just haven't gotten that deal in place yet, and they're still negotiating on it. But I think there is a chance, to be honest. I've seen Paulo Costa training online. That doesn't mean anything, but it's kind of a clue. And I felt like the closer we got to the fight, the more I started to believe there's a chance that Paulo Costa actually fights on this card. And I'm wondering if they're still working out the details, they're still negotiating. And I have a feeling, even though people are now saying, oh, Khamzat Chimaev versus Paulo Costa is official for 294, there's so much fake MMA news circulating around. I don't know if I even believe that. But now what I'm thinking the UFC is going to get a deal done. I think the UFC is going to get a deal done, and I think we're going to get Paulo Costa versus Ikram Aliskerov on UFC 291, and that's why it's number 3. But for the longest time, up until recently, like I made this list the other day, up until recently, I felt like it wasn't going to happen. So it's still honestly like 50-50, but something is telling me now that I think it might happen. But I just want to see Paulo Costa fight. Paulo Costa is a very exciting fighter. Remember the fight against Joe Romero? Even the fight, even though it was sloppy against Luke Rockhold, it was still a very entertaining fight. And I love these types of matchups because you get this unranked contender getting a massive step up in competition. I was hyped when the UFC announced Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards back in 2019 or 2020, I think it was. I was hyped when they announced that. I was hyped when they announced Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. I was hyped when they announced Umar Nurmagomedov versus Corey Sandhagen, which all those fights are similar where you have an unranked contender who looks really good or a low-ranked contender that looks really good, but they haven't had that big step up yet. And that's exactly what this is for Ikram Aliskerov. So I'm hoping this fight comes to fruition. But I'm very, very nervous that it doesn't happen. And I hate that Costa versus Ikram may not happen. And also, it kind of ruins the card in advance, at least the anticipation, because what I look forward to most with these big cards is anticipating the fights. And this whole entire time, I've been like, oh, Costa versus Ikram's probably not going to happen. And it's still up in the air, so it kind of ruins the excitement levels for different fights because you're like, oh, this is a loss to the card if this fight doesn't happen. But we still don't have any confirmed reports from legitimate sources. The only thing we know for sure is that Roman Dolidze will not fight at UFC 291. We know that for 100% certainty. That has been confirmed. So hopefully that fight ends up happening, but it may not, and that's a reason I hate UFC 291. Moving on to my number 2 reason I hate UFC 291, and that is because I believe at UFC 291, we will see the end of Alex Pereira's career. I think this is gross mismanagement by Alex Pereira's manager, by his team, and by the UFC. Alex Pereira fought on UFC 287 not that long ago, in April. 112 days separates UFC 287 and UFC 291. Well, what happened at UFC 287? Oh, Alex Pereira got flatline KO'd. It's not smart to have that quick of a turnaround. I know he's going up in weight. Maybe because of the weight change, his chin won't be as frail. But look at the matchup they gave him. That's no easy task against Jan Blachowicz. I love the fight. I just hate the time frame. You shouldn't be getting flatline KO'd and be shot up with arrows in celebration by Israel Adesanya and then turn around 112 days later, literally 3 months, a little over 3 months, and fighting Jan Blachowicz with the legendary Polish power. And on top of that, we've seen Alex Pereira's grappling exposed in the past. Andreas Michailidis was able to out-grapple him a bit. Adesanya was able to out-grapple him a bit in the first fight. And now he's fighting Jan Blachowicz. We've seen how good Jan Blachowicz's grappling is against Israel Adesanya, who Adesanya out-grappled Pereira. And I know MMA math doesn't always work that way, but I just think this is a horrible matchup. I would have rather seen them give Alex Pereira like a Johnny Walker or something along those lines And then on top of that, not only do I feel like this could be the end of Alex Pereira's career because he moved up a weight class because he got KO'd by Adesanya. If he gets KO'd here or gets dominated by Jan Blachowicz here, where does he go? You know, a lot of guys are like, oh, I'm going up and down in weight class when I start to run into some problems in my division and run into a losing streak just for a change of scenery. Well, now if he just loses right off the jump to Jan Blachowicz, where does he go? Because what's he just going to wait? You know, because if Jan Blachowicz beats him, Alex Pereira is not going to be in the title picture anytime soon. And Alex Pereira against any of these guys who have grappling ability, Nikita Krylov, Alexander Rakic, you know, again, Jan Blachowicz. If Jan Blachowicz exposes him, some of these guys with better grappling will be able to expose him as well. And then also, this is a big fight. Jan Blachowicz versus Alex Pereira is a big fight, especially considering Jamal Hill is out. We don't know when Yuri Prochazka is coming back. I wish this was 5 rounds. And I know, you know, that's kind of counterintuitive considering I don't think it's good for Alex Pereira. But if you're going to have a fight that could arguably be a #1 contender fight, especially with all these fighters out, it should be 5 rounds. I'll be really annoyed if this is a super close competitive striking match where Alex Pereira is able to shuck off the takedowns and they're having a leg kick battle and it ends after 3 rounds. And I know there's a chance this ends in the 1st or 2nd round. I know there's a chance of that. But I've talked about this before, and I've talked about it. Petr Yan versus Sean O'Malley. Oh, I wish we had a 4th and 5th round then. Oh, I talked about it with Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. I wish we had a 4th and 5th round then. And I'm going to talk about it again here. So I just think it's unfortunate matchmaking. Too quick of a turnaround for Alex Pereira, and I also wish that the fight was 5 rounds if it's going to be that important of a fight, because the winner of this fight may very well be fighting for a title in the very near future. Moving on to my #1 reason I hate UFC 291, and if you watch my channel with any regularity, you probably already knew this was coming, and that is I absolutely despise the BMF belt. We're getting Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje for the BMF belt. Why, UFC? Why did they have to do this? It's unnecessary. They can't even say it. They say BMF. They can't even say it. They can't even promote it. They can't say baddest motherfucker. They can't say that in the promotion. Why are you having this corny, cringy WWE style belt on the line? You're delegitimizing the sport. And there's a bunch of these fanboys who watch both MMA, mainly the UFC, and they watch WWE, and they want the UFC to become WWE. Ariel Helwani's constantly pushing for stuff like this, and I hate it. It's a fake belt. We're giving out fake belts. This is a belt for 2 guys. Oh, you can't become undisputed champion? Let's give you another belt. Let's just make up a fake belt and give it to you just so we can have a belt on the line in the main event. I mean, seriously. It's WWE-esque. I'd rather them have a ladder match. I'd literally rather have a ladder match. Tie the belt up above the ring, put some ladders in there, let Poirier and Justin Gaethje fight it out to see who can get to the top of the ladder and get the belt. I'd rather that. The BMF belt, I think back to UFC 244 where it originated. Nate Diaz, Jorge Masvidal. And I didn't like it then, but I didn't despise it. I'm like, oh, it's just a one-off. They're never going to do it again. And, you know, you had The Rock come out there and throw it over his shoulder. And it was just so, I was there live. And I thought, oh my God, this is so cringy. This is so corny. And then you have The Rock wrapping it around Jorge Masvidal's waist after he wins due to doctor stoppage, the least BMF way to win a belt. And then afterwards, you know, he gets brutally KO'd by Kamaru Usman. And then he goes on to get 50-45 by Colby. Then he goes on to get 30-27 by Gilbert. And then he retires. But, oh, he still has the BMF belt. It doesn't matter. He lost all these fights. He still has the BMF belt. Now he retires. Oh, he vacates the BMF belt now? Well, he had a belt that he could never lose, but now he can vacate it? Makes absolutely 0 sense. And then you take 2 absolute savages like Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, 2 guys who underappreciated the interim belt because the interim belt really wasn't a real belt either. You had Justin Gaethje throwing it away after he won the interim belt. But they're going to wrap the BMF belt around themselves and feel good about it? Oh, we're second best in the division. That's basically what they're saying, and not even that, really. The UFC is just doing this because I believe they have stipulations in their contract with ESPN Plus that all their pay-per-views must have a belt on the line. And so they're like, oh, we'll just put the BMF belt on the line. Jorge vacate it. We'll have him wrap the belt around the winner. It's just cringy. It's just corny. I hate it. Next, what are we going to start bringing out? We're going to bring out shillelaghs. We're going to bring out steel chairs. We're going to start putting people through tables. It is a slippery slope, and there is a lot of people who wish to turn the UFC and MMA in general into WWE, and you know, there's people out there who don't really watch the sport, who are aware of it, who already think it's like WWE. And now you have the merger, you know, where WME owns both the WWE and the UFC. And now you have the BMF belt on the line, and you didn't even need it. Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje sells itself. That's an incredible fight. That's an incredible rematch. Two of the most exciting fighters in the UFC ever. Two guys who always deliver. And, you know, another thing that I truly hate about this, I honestly believe this is some type of move to get Conor McGregor back in a title fight. Because Conor McGregor, let's be honest, if he ever does fight again, you know, he's clearly not fighting Michael Chandler, but if he ever does fight again, the UFC is going to want him to fight for a belt. Well, he's not fighting for an undisputed belt. He's not winning an undisputed belt. You think he has a chance against Islam Makhachev? I don't think so. Even if he does step in there again, it probably won't be till next year. And it just seems like no matter how much Michael Chandler just brown noses him, it seems like he's not going to give Michael Chandler the fight. We still don't have that fight announced. So I think at some point in time, I don't know how it's going to play out. I can't see the future. They're going to finagle Conor McGregor into a BMF title fight. And they're going to make it where, oh, Dustin Poirier or Justin Gaethje is defending the BMF belt against Conor McGregor. Oh, this is a massive event. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Maybe Conor McGregor will walk out with Hornswoggle. I don't know. Have a shillelagh. My name is McGregor, and I like to fight. Maybe that'll happen. I'm just sick of it. I hate the BMF belt. They're selling wolf tickets. It's unnecessary. It's just a promotional tool. And I know all belts are just promotional tools, but the UFC is supposed to operate under the assumption that whoever has the belt is the best fighter in that weight class. And now you're introducing fake belts. Let's have a hardcore belt. Let's make a hardcore belt on the line, hardcore UFC belt. You have to defend it at any period of time. You know, you have a lot of these champions who fight once a year. Let's give somebody a hardcore belt. I'd like to see that play out at this point in time. You might as well do it. You're doing the BMF belt. So I just hate the BMF belt. That's my number one reason I hate UFC 291. I'm sure if you watched the channel, you probably knew that was coming. But let me know what you guys think of my list. Is there anything I missed? Comment it down below. Don't forget to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And thank you so much for watching.